Well, exactly as I predicted several weeks ago, the backlash for Disney continues to roll in. The most recent entry in this saga is a new poll from the Trafalgar Group, somebody that's frankly got a pretty good reputation and a fairly good track record of conducting very accurate polling, not only in several political campaigns, but also in several other areas for business and such. Now, we're going to talk about polling today in general at first because I think it's important that people understand out there how polling works and what the differences are between a quality poll and just something that is media trash. Stay tuned. We're about to get right into it. Renegade Online. Well, welcome back, folks. It's another great day here at Valiant Renegade. It's good to see everybody out there once again. And if you are like one of the many folks watching this video that are not yet subscribed, please go ahead and hit that subscription button, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on the social medias, and do, of course, leave a comment before you head out the door today. We try to respond to as many as we possibly can, although we've been getting more and more these days. It's getting a little bit tougher, but I'm still trying to keep up. So, before we kind of get into some of the nitty-gritty on this polling stuff with Disney, and it's not been a good month for Disney at all, and if you have not been following the videos on this channel, we have been documenting everything since this started roughly a little over a month ago now, as a matter of fact, with Disney's foray into Florida legislation, certain Florida legislations that Disney just, at least some of their staff, couldn't stay out of and then has now dragged Disney kicking and screaming into. And of course, to no surprise, to my completely perfect prediction, this was going to blow up in Disney's face. It was very obvious from the beginning. We now have hard data that is going to show this. But as many folks out there probably over time have seen a great number of polls and polling data and things like this, and everybody always tends to wonder, what are legitimate polls and what aren't? So I want to start right there so you can understand, because this poll regarding the Walt Disney Company and what they've been recently doing, this polling data that suggests that a lot of people are going to be walking away from the Walt Disney Company, paying customers, parents, kids, things like that. You have to understand the veracity, the validity of a poll like this from the Trafalgar Group. So I want to go through some basics of this because it's important to understand just how bad this poll for Disney really is. Now, most people have taken a poll at some point in their life, even if it's just something as simple and as obnoxious as a Twitter poll or a YouTube poll. These are the most unscientific polls out there. They don't really collect data on who's responding or have any type of control over what their sample is, and there's no way to know going in what your ultimate sample size is going to be or which votes are really legitimate or what pieces of the sample are legitimate, because anybody can just click in. But when you have professional polling firms, there's a number of different approaches they can take. The first thing you need to take into account is the sample size. How big is the number of respondents that this poll actually collected? The larger the sample size, typically speaking, the more accurate the data becomes. The other side of things is, who are they actually polling? And to give you a very brief overview for the point of this video, let's talk about what type of voters out there are in terms of political polls. So the first thing you might see in any type of poll when it comes to this sort of data is just simply adults, meaning anybody over the age of 18 could be in the sample and therefore could offer a response. The problem with this is when they conduct polls for political races or something along these lines, those are the people that are frankly, or the sample that is least likely to actually engage. In other words, they're the folks that are least likely to actually follow through with whatever answer that they gave to the pollster. The next step up the ladder is registered voters. Now, registered voters is simply taking the list of who is on your local registrar of voters list, who in your area or who in the country is actually registered to vote. Now, this sounds like a big step up, and in some respects it can be. The problem is that registered voters, by and large, is not terribly much more accurate than just simply saying all adults. The reason is because there are different tiers of registered voters. They are ranked according to how often they vote. Now, when I was running political campaigns many years ago, we had registered voters ranked from 1 to 4. 1 being least likely to vote, however, they are still registered. 4 being these people vote in everything. So when you take a poll of registered voters, you're collecting information and data that is sometime going to be very much off the mark. Registered voters going from we never vote or we vote once every 4 years to people that vote in every single election that comes along in their municipality, sometimes 2, 3, 4 times a year, very different dynamic. So that's what takes us to likely voters. That is historically the most accurate sampling of polling data that you can possibly do, and it's also, frankly, the most expensive. Likely voters are voters that are typically ranked as 3s or 4s, meaning they vote in every single election that comes before them, or almost every single election that comes before them. So if you really want to get the most accurate polling data from people that actually do what they say in a poll more often than not, or at least far more often on average than a regular adult or just the average registered voter, you want the likely voters. Now, this leads us to the poll from the Trafalgar Group asking questions about what parents are going to do with the Walt Disney Company, because their sample size is over 1,000, which is about on par with what you would want, at least on average, and they're using likely voters. So here from the Trafalgar Group, we have the details of this poll. And again, this is important to understand. As much as this information might seem a little mundane or a little too mathy for some people, this is what's important to understand why this poll actually matters because of the way it was conducted. The poll was surveyed from respondents from April 5th to April 8th. So the first thing we know is that this poll was conducted well after all of this information about Disney's foray into politics, their statements, and some of these Reimagine Tomorrow videos had begun to leak. They had over 1,000 respondents. These are likely general election voters, and they had a margin of error of under 3%. And that's key. A lot of times when you see polls come out on just simple adults or registered voters, the margins of error tend to be much higher because, again, you can't always depend on a lot of those folks actually following through with what they're responding to the pollster with. And that margin of error comes with a 95% level of confidence based on the Trafalgar Group's own methodology. And if you want more information on their polling methodology, you can go to their website. We'll leave a link below. Now, this poll was conducted on Disney's business. News reports reveal that Disney is focusing on creating content to expose young children to sexual ideas. Does this make you more or less likely to do business with Disney? Now, full stop, that is the actual question, and this is part of what we'll talk about later with crosstabs and things like this, where that comes into it. That's very important, and people need to understand things like crosstabs when it comes to polls, because those are very, very key to determining whether a poll is legitimately accurate, or at least as accurate as possible, as compared to other polls that tend to skew numbers deliberately one way or another to achieve a desired outcome based on whomever is paying for the poll. Now, this is the number that's been talked about. Nearly 68 to 69% of respondents said that they were either less likely or much less likely to do business with Disney. In fact, much less likely was a runaway favorite at 57.2% of all responses out of the 1,079 sample size that actually responded to this poll. That is staggering. Now, on the surface, we could say, well, who did they really talk to? Well, that's the crosstabs, folks, and they're in this poll, and that's what makes this so damaging for Disney. Now, let's take the GOP, or at least folks that are registered Republicans or people that identified themselves to the pollster as being registered Republican. And you get a result that you would tend to expect in this situation. much less likely at 76%, less likely at 9.3%, putting the total response at 85% of registered Republicans responding to Trafalgar Group that they are going to be less likely to do business with Disney going forward. Now, again, not terribly much of a surprise considering the what the poll is talking about here, specifically with the Florida House Bill 1557, the so-called quote-unquote don't say gay bill as it has been erroneously mislabeled. It is actually the parental education bill or the parental rights and education bill. But let's go down here where this is where it gets really ugly for Disney. Democrat respondents, people that told Trafalgar Group that they identify as registered Democrats, less likely at 14%, much less likely at 32.4%. That means that nearly 50% of all Democrat registered voter respondents to this poll said that they are also less likely to do business with Disney. That is awful. That is really bad for Disney, because it'd be one thing to say, oh, it's just a bunch of Republicans saying this. Oh, no. You have roughly half of registered Democrats that responded to this poll saying that this is driving them away as well. I told you this was going to happen, and here it is. How about no party affiliation? How about people that are registered as independent, no party or other? Well, guess what? It's even worse. Much less likely at 63.4%, less likely at 9.1%, for a total of 72.5% of independent voters saying that they are also less likely to do business with the Walt Disney Company. That is almost as many as the registered Republicans that responded to this poll. Again, this is the great middle. This is the swath of voter that both major Republican and Democrat parties in this country fight over every single major election cycle, either midterms or presidential election. And look at the skew, nearly 73% skewing in favor of walking away from Disney over what they've been doing. Now, there was a second question in this poll of how likely are you to support family-friendly alternatives to Disney? And the numbers, unsurprisingly, came in very similarly, meaning that most respondents, a wide majority, 60-some-odd%, came in saying that, yes, they would be glad to support alternatives to Disney. I don't want to belabor this question too much. I do want to get to the crosstabs because this is where things really get interesting. So here we go to age participation, and you can see where the respondents come from. No, these are not just a bunch of old fuddy-duddies. Look at this. The 35 to 64-year-old group makes up roughly 50% of the respondents, a little over 50%. When you throw in the 65 plus, meaning the grandparents out there, this brings it up to almost 75% of respondents, or close to 80% at that point. In other words, these are the people with children and grandchildren that are paying Disney's bills. Let's go down to ethnicity on this one. Who was the makeup of this poll in an ethnic sense? 71% of respondents were white, 12.3% of respondents were black, 11.5% Hispanic, 3.9% Asian, 1.1% other. In other words, this is a fairly accurate demographic representation of the American population as a whole. So again, good on Trafalgar Group. They've got their numbers pretty close. Democrat, 39.3%. Republican, 35.6% of respondents. Nonpartisan, 25.1%. Again, you can make the argument that this is also a fairly accurate representation of party breakdown in this country. So again, we're getting a good cross-section of America's demographics. Gender participation, roughly 47% male and 53% female. So this kind of taps out the notion that this is just a bunch of angry white men out there, isn't it? And here's the crosstabs that we talk about, and this is what's so important. You can see here, much less likely and less likely. You've got a healthy section of Democrat respondents to this saying less likely and much less likely. Republican respondents, no party and other. Let's go down to some more crosstabs here. Age group, you can see here, and this is what's stunning, less likely and much less likely. Look at the 18 to 24-year-old group here. The 18 to 24-year-old group. This is supposed to be the Gen Z, the millennials out there, right? Less likely and much less likely. 16.3% and 46.2% respectively for the 18 to 24-year-old group, saying that this makes them less likely to do business with Disney. These are the kids. These are the young ones they're talking about in all these videos they released from Reimagine Tomorrow and how different this generation is. But meanwhile, Trafalgar's polling data shows that almost 60% of respondents in that age group said no. 25 to 34, we get a very similar result. And 35 to 44, again, the same sort of thing. 45 to 64, it climbs to 70%. And in 65 plus, again, climbing over 70%. This is across the board bad for Disney. Ethnicity, right? It must have just been all the white folks that responded to this. The angry white folks. No. Crosstabs, once again, crosstabs. Less likely and much less likely. Asian respondents, over 50%. Less likely and much less likely. Black respondents, over 50% of less likely and much less likely. Hispanic respondents, buries the needle, about 70% less likely and much less likely. White respondents, again, also at about 70% of less likely and much less likely. So as you can see, there's the data in black and white. This is a very well-conducted poll. The methodology is about as sound as you could hope for from any third-party polling firm. We have the crosstabs. We have the data. They sampled likely voters out there, and they've given us a margin of error plus or minus 2.99%. I don't know what else to say to the Disney company at this point. This is not a fly-by-night pollster. This is a pollster that has had a very, very enviable track record in recent years. Some that have made some other larger pollsters kind of jealous of them, to be quite frank. The Trafalgar Group knows what they're doing. This is bad news for Disney. I have been saying this. A lot of other folks have been saying this. Now we have the numbers. They're in black and white, and now you understand how valid these numbers are. You now understand, I hope, how to read polls like this and understand what this type of data means. Now, only time will tell if this actually results in a serious impact on the Walt Disney Company's business. But if this polling data is even halfway accurate, they are going to see a significant financial impact in the coming months if they don't pull back on this, if they don't change course, and if they continue to double and triple down on this insanity. They are going to be in some deep, deep trouble. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and good luck, Disney. You're going to need it, because right now I think you are screwed, and I think you're screwed hard. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on social medias, and until next time, drop a comment, give me something to do. I'll try to respond. Take care.